Hello and welcome back to the workshop, where today we're going to continue the story of the Manurhin revolvers. So last time we had a look at the MR93 in all its glory, and yes, it's a magnificent piece of craftsmanship for remarkable marksmen, but quite frankly it always was and always will be a horrifically expensive piece of kit, and not everyone needs or wants to spend that kind of money. And Manurhin was well aware of that, and they were trying to cater for more modest requirements and more modest means. And in the early 80s they had a short-lived but fruitful relationship with Ruger, and during the tech exchanges they learnt they acquired the microfusion casting techniques, and there was also some rights to adopt the Ruger lockwork. And this gave the first things that came out of this partnership were a series of police revolvers. So the police would have liked to equip everybody with MR73s, but it was just too expensive. So they asked Manurhin to develop some alternatives. So the first one was the RMR, Ruger Manurhin Revolver, and then there was the Special Police F1, and then there was the MR88 SX series, which was more catered towards casual target shooting. And these essentially use the Ruger Security 6 or Speed 6 lockwork, except it's not all mounted on the trigger guard, it's just mounted inside the frame with a classic side plate. But the actual lockwork is exactly the same. So unfortunately, there was some disagreements about rights, so the agreement with Ruger ended in 83, 84, I think. But the R&D in Manurhin didn't end there. They were convinced that they could bring something else to shooters, and since it was the early 90s, they decided to throw in the challenge of designing everything by computers, because that was the future, especially with the upcoming CAD programs. They were spreading out. They'd existed, of course, for a long time, but the capabilities were then such that you could start designing things from the ground up. And this gave birth to the MR93, which is perhaps the most cyberpunk of all revolvers. It would look very much at home in something like Total Recall. So let's take a closer look at what they made. So here it is up close. As you can see, it's got a very distinctive, clean, slab-sided look to it. This is the 6-inch model, longest barrel length. You could also get it in 3-inch, 4-inch, and the very unique to Manurhin 5¼ inch. Now, the barrel is actually two components. We have the core, which is the barrel, which is a cold hammer forged steel barrels, exactly the same ones as fitted to the MR73, and the outside is a steel shroud. Now this obviously puts an enormous amount of weight on the revolver, especially the 6-inch model, and that was actually one of the complaints about the whole thing. It was really quite a boat anchor. So the business model for acquiring one of these was also rather odd. You couldn't go into a gun shop and just buy one of these new. You were expected to fill out an order form at your dealers. They would send it off to Manurhin, who would then assemble it out of the parts bins, and you would then get a cased revolver back to collect. It would come with the sights you selected. In this case, this is the target setup. So you have a millet fully adjustable rear sight, which is very, very nice. And we have a nice square front sight with a slight rearward rake, so you can get a nice sharp silhouette of the front sight, and it is a very good setup. There is also a sort of more sporty setup available with just a drift adjustable sort of dovetailed rear sight and ramped front sights of various heights. So you would get a set and you could swap them in and out. There's a little set screw in the front there to change out the front sight. In terms of grips, there were two available. This is the normal standard grip, which is really nice. Because of my sausage fingers, it's actually, I find the base here a little bit too wide. But I guess for a person with normal fingers it would be fine. And the other one, of which this is a resin copy, was the so-called anatomical grip. Finger grooves, so either it'll fit or it won't. I haven't actually tried this one to shoot with the revolver. Dry firing, it's quite comfortable. But both of these grips were designed by Morini, if you recognise the logo. So Morini is an Italian company that does sort of ISSF type target pistols, and they know their stuff when it comes to grips and ergonomics. So they were really trying, as I said, really pushing for that sports market. There's something odd here, which I'm sure the wheel gunners amongst you spotted straight away. There's something missing here, and there's something extra there. That's right, they have moved the cylinder release and fitted it directly to the crane. I don't know exactly why. I don't think they did it just because. My theory, and I have no proof of this, is that they thought that since you have to bring your left hand down when you push the cylinder out, normally when you push the release, you guide the cylinder out, why not put the release directly down there? So that when your hand goes up, you release and eject as normal. In theory, this is great. I think the execution is not quite there. The button is actually tiny, and what you tend to do is your finger hits the frame, it pushes a little on the button, and then it hits the frame, and it's not sufficient to release. So I'll show you what actually happens when you push the button. You've got that little catch that jumps up and down, and that goes into a notch, I don't know if you can see with the lighting, which is in the frame under there. That's very secure. The other problem is that if you start applying side pressure on the cylinder, as you will, because you want to guide it out, this actually puts pressure on the little catch, and it hinders its downward travel. So you're fighting, if you push too hard, you're fighting as you're pushing the button. The ideal situation would be to hit the button first, and then it releases quite well. I mean, with practice, it's quite good. It does tend to bite at your fingernails because you hit the frame there, which is quite sharp. I think if the button was more prominent, or maybe just slightly bigger, I think it would have been much, much better, but I guess that would have broken the aesthetics a bit. So, A for effort at least. So let's do a little bit of disassembly. The grip is just held on by one screw, and yes, it is empty. So let's pull that off. Next, we just need to cock the hammer, and there's a little hole visible there. You put a pin through it. Normally there would be a multi-tool delivered with the revolver. And then we can let it fall. And then we remove these very 90s Allen screws. There's one on this side, and one on the back. And then we can just lift out the side plate. Oop, and now I can lower the cylinder. And there we have the entire trigger unit mounted on the side plate. And this is all we have in the cylinder. You can see, perfect for casting. Very, very little machining to do once you've got your mould set up correctly. I can also remove the crane assembly. It's also done very easily. Pushing on that little catch here up there. Same spring that's biasing the locking catch. The cylinder has nothing special. So remember at the beginning I said that Manurhin had a relationship with Ruger, and this really shows the lockwork. This is taken directly from the Security 6, just mounted on this side plate. And it works otherwise exactly the same way. We've got a torsion spring here, which is responsible for the trigger return. Now the cylinder safety is actually now taken care of by the hand, so that enters this notch here in the side plate, so that the cylinder, or so the mechanism is blocked when the cylinder is outside, is open or taken off the gun. Normally that's taken care of with the cylinder catch, but of course cylinder catch is now down here somewhere. Yeah, otherwise there's nothing really unusual to see. Now the recoil shield is just a plate that's screwed on. You can see it there, and you can see it on this side. It's just this plate here that's just held on by 2 screws. So again, really very, very simple. Now, reassembly is absurdly simple, pretty much the same in reverse. So you put the whole unit back in the frame. Then you just, well, you can already screw the side plate on at this stage. It's only the right side screw is blued because the other one is underneath the grips. So then you just need to make sure that the tip of your mainspring is aligned with the hammer, and just put this pin in, which fixes the support plate for the mainspring. Oops, and it's got a tendency to fall straight through. Put a finger in there behind. Now you cock the hammer a bit just to make sure it's aligned. You know it's well aligned because then the pin here is free to come out. So there we are. Then we can reassemble the cylinder and crane. Pop that back in the frame. Function test. And there we are. And then we just need to put the grips back on. Slide on and then screw the end, and you're done.
Ja, also das Schlüssel ist ja normal, aber es hat sich angefühlt wie eine mechanische Abriebtasche, weißt du, wie es immer kracht sind.
Hast du mal komplett allein?
Ich habe angefangen, dann habe ich jetzt mal ein schlechtes Gewissen bekommen. Und dann habe ich
Nein, schön.
ich muss funktionsfähig bleiben.
Ja, klar.
Und dann bin ich leicht nervös, und wenn ich sie schieße das nächste Mal, dann denke ich, wenn sie jetzt nicht geht. Dann nimmt sie den Waffenrecht und lang und sieht das etwas.
Ja, begegnet.
Hey, wenn ich... Was sagst du?
Nein. So viel schlecht, dass ich die Nase noch verraten. Ja.
Ja. Ja, der dritte. Ja, der dritte. Oh.
Nein, ich glaube nicht. 20.
So as you saw from the range visit, this revolver shoots just as well as the idiot behind the trigger can. Honestly, I find that this revolver soaks up the 357 Magnum recoil far better ergonomically than the Manurhin 73. Now, of course, this is a heck of a lot heavier, but I don't think that's the sole reason. The grip contributes considerably. This is an extremely comfortable grip, despite my my early skepticism. I will say, however, that I'm very glad I got it in black and not in a sort of deep, dark chocolate brown. Also, it has this sort of very smooth slab sides here on the side, and it means you can basically grip it like a semi-auto pistol. And all of that contributes to a nice controllable recoil. However, was this a commercial success? Unfortunately, no. It was in fact a total flop because of this curious commercial model they had. We know they only assembled and therefore sold 640 of these. So there was not much interest at all. The main complaints, firstly, were it looks weird. Too avant-garde for the 90s. The finish is unfortunately not very good, not very resilient, not very rugged, and it tends to rub off, particularly on the cylinder. Already on this one, it chips off, so it's some kind of paint finish. And lastly, and perhaps the most surprising, since it's supposed to be the target audience is supposed to be sporting people, the double action is kind of really meh. You've got an enormous hump after the first couple of millimeters of trigger travel. And I don't really know where it comes from. The mechanism itself is relatively simple. There's no reason why you should have this variation in trigger pull. The only thing I think of is somehow they didn't get the angles between the hand and the indexing ratchet right, which should have come through in testing. But whatever it is, it takes a lot of force to get the cylinder rotating at the start. They did try and address this. There were enough complaints that they had a look, and they proposed a recall and upgrade if you wanted to from 1995, but they didn't. So the modifications they didn't change the mechanism, the lockwork. All they did was they tried to reduce friction around the cylinder and try and isolate the lock as much as they could, or further, from fouling. And it's already well insulated, so. But anyway, the result is they couldn't really do anything. So yeah, that was a flop. So they did make one more attempt based on this concept, and that's the MR93, which uses the same lockwork, has a frame that looks slightly more conventional, and they considerably lighten the barrel. So it has a little vents, just like on the Colt Pythons, for example. It still uses the button on the crane, but you end up with a slightly more classic looking and lighter revolver. This apparently seemed to be more to people's liking, but still, as far as I can tell, there's about 550 odd made of those. So I think it's the classic example of a company having a product that's so good that no one wants to buy anything else. You save up a couple of months more, and get an MR73. Why waste your money on one of these, unfortunately? I hope you liked the little story of this revolver. Certainly worth looking out for if you collect, obviously, Manurhin revolvers, but also if you like interesting revolvers, because, you know, it's kind of a offshoot from the classic revolver family. Pretty much the only thing nowadays that's any different are the Chiappa rhinos, which have somehow managed to break convention and seem to be relatively popular. And I'd love to try one out as well. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, of course, for all your support on whatever platform you wish to support us on. We can't do it without you. And I shall see you very soon on the range, I hope. Bye.